Hi, I am M. Roblin. I'm about helping you seek out your potential, awaken to new possibility, zoom up, zoom out from those problems, get a fresh perspective. Calling it out. This is like a mini series I've been doing, calling out behavior that isn't additive or constructive to building that kind of inclusive culture that's really important. If you haven't seen some of the videos in this series, go back and watch them. And thank you to those of you who have been commenting, giving feedback, and sharing some specific examples. Um, I want to talk of something more on the like systemic side, when somebody calls out something bigger than you. So far we've been discussing like, okay, calling out behaviors that are based on, maybe blind spots, or even, people that have malintention and are kind of toxic, like how to deal with that, how to manage it, and how to deal with it when somebody calls you out. But I think one thing I want to point out, and this definitely can, and does happen, which is when somebody's noticing a larger, bigger systemic problem, like a problem in the system, a system problem, a systemic problem. Um, Maybe it's in your organization, it's something about recruiting. That's a very typical one when we look at barriers to being more inclusive. It can be found in the pipeline of how new talent is recruited. And maybe there's some biases built in. Maybe it's the schools you recruit from. Maybe it's the resumes haven't been really updated and they're loaded with a particular gender lens bias. Or maybe there's like they haven't been updated, and so happens a lot where you get like more and more and more and more and more criteria, and the list of criteria is like crazy long, and that can turn away candidates that actually maybe are very qualified but feel not qualified, and so they don't apply. There's many things. I don't even want to go in there. What my point here is, what do you do when somebody calls out a systemic bias that is bigger than you, and you don't know how to solve it? And maybe it definitely isn't solvable in that moment that it's called out. So like, what do you do? How do you respond? And what steps do you take? And I'm gonna start here with the really, let's just not do this response, which frankly is the one I hear all too frequently. And that response is like, the person who calls it out, it's like, I'm noticing this pattern, I'm noticing this systemic bias or inequality in our system, and that person brings it up, and then the leader of that team says, or the depending on who it's directed towards, human resources or a leader, and then the response is, huh, yeah, interesting. Good observation. Okay, how about you solve it? And maybe I'm exaggerating, but like, that kind of happens a lot, where the person's that brought it up is tasked with solving it. Now, maybe sometimes in some very certain situations that could be appropriate, but most of the time I'm going to go ahead and say no. Number one, because they're super complex problems. And number two, by pushing it back on the person that brought it up, you're actually disincentivizing everybody else from ever speaking up again. I mean, it's like, I don't ever want to call it anything. If I'm going to be tasked with solving it, like, I've got enough to do. So when somebody notices and calls out a systemic pattern, the correct response is, thank you for noticing that. Wow. Tell me more about it. And maybe it isn't the right time, but find another time to dig into that person's observation. Thank them publicly, even if you take time separately to dig into it with them. In a more public forum later, I would be acknowledging that person's effort, and don't try to solve it in one go. Instead, really start from a place of inquiry, from a place of curiosity, to take it seriously and start to have some of the conversations. Things like recruitment, there are tons of solutions that are available, and it really does, when you are able to break down some of the systemic barriers and build more diverse teams. I mean, it really does take teams from good to great. It really does take cultures from, and from being innovative and healthy to being, super radically innovative and very high performing. And so, yeah. What do you think? Have you ever called something out and then been tasked with solving it and it made you feel like you never wanted to call anything out again? Or has somebody ever called something out in your presence that's far bigger than you? What did you do? Yeah, what would you do? Let's keep this dialogue going.